The execution was broadcast across the stars. From the Imperial core to the farthest edges of human space, the image of the SAS general standing on the gallows became the symbol of everything the Galactic Empire wished to impose upon Earth. A warning, a demonstration of absolute power. The man stood tall, his hands bound, his uniform stripped of insignia but not of dignity. Even in the final moments as the Imperial Viceroy read the charges against him, he refused to lower his gaze. The Empire had not been at war with Earth. Not officially. Humanity's entry into the galactic stage had been recent, its military deemed insignificant by the towering might of an empire that had ruled for millennia. But the Empire had underestimated them. It had thought Earth another planet to be absorbed, another species to be cowed into servitude. The general had proven them wrong. His unit had crippled their supply lines, shattered their fleets in daring raids, and turned planetary occupations into costly quagmires. He had been the ghost in their systems, the shadow in their halls. Till now. The capture had been an act of treachery. A neutral meeting between Earth's envoys and the Imperial Senate had turned into an ambush. The general had been extracted from his warship, his crew slaughtered in the cold vacuum of space. He had been paraded through the streets of the Empire's capital, his face broadcast across 1,000 worlds. The trial had lasted less than an hour. Crimes against the throne, rebellion, terrorism, words that meant nothing when spoken by the mouths of tyrants. When the noose tightened around his throat, he did not beg. He did not waver. His final words, spoken clearly, broadcast unedited despite the Empire's censors, sent a chill through every human watching. You think you have won. But you have only given Earth a reason to fight. And then he fell. The silence after his death was not of submission but of fury. On Earth, on Mars, on the outer colonies, a single truth burned in the hearts of mankind. This would not stand. The Empire had made a mistake. They had assumed that humanity, small and fragmented, would accept their loss, would bow before superior force. But they did not understand what they had done. In the war rooms beneath Washington, D.C., in the command centers hidden deep within the Arctic, in the underground bunkers of Luna Base, the United States and its allies gathered. The president's address was simple. There would be no negotiations. No compromises. The Empire had drawn first blood. Earth would finish the war. The declaration was sent, a message of cold, calculated fury. The words were neither poetic nor grandiose. They were a promise. The United States of America formally declares a state of war against the Galactic Empire. The full might of humanity will be brought to bear. There will be no surrender. The response came in the form of imperial laughter. The Senate mocked the notion. The Emperor himself dismissed it outright. They had broken countless civilizations. They had crushed empires greater than this insignificant, single-system race. What could Earth possibly do? But those who had fought against humanity in the outer colonies, the admirals who had seen their warships vanish in the void, the generals who had lost entire legions to battles they should have won, felt something else. A creeping, gnawing dread. Because they had seen what humans were capable of when they were given a cause. And now they had won. The war began with silence. Not the silence of surrender, but the measured quiet before a hurricane. The United States, once seen as a relic of a fractured world, moved with terrifying precision. Satellites repositioned in orbit. Warships, long confined to Earth's gravitational cradle, left their docks, slipping into the black with engines burning cold. The fleets were smaller than the Empire's, their numbers insignificant by comparison, but they carried something the Empire had never faced before, humanity's unrelenting will to defy. Admiral Jonathan Hayes stood on the bridge of the USS Nemesis, the flagship of Earth's first true interstellar armada. He was not a man given to theatrics, not one for rousing speeches or symbolic gestures. His was a quiet, calculating mind, honed by decades of service in a world that had long prepared for war among its own nations but had never expected to fight beyond its skies. He had seen the footage of the SAS general's execution. He had watched the man fall, had heard his final words. He carried those words with him as the countdown to engagement reached its final seconds. The Empire's first mistake was assuming Earth would fight a conventional war. They expected grand fleets meeting in deep space, orderly battles of attrition where numbers determined victory. But humanity had never fought like that. From the moment the first strike order was given, Earth's forces waged war like insurgents among the stars. The first targets were logistics hubs. Automated factories on distant moons, vital relay stations pulsing with Imperial transmissions. Silent explosions blossomed in the void, severing supply chains that had existed for centuries. Cyber warfare units, faceless and nameless, cracked into Imperial networks, turning systems against their masters. Planetary governors woke to find their security forces in disarray, their orbital defenses suddenly blind. Every battle that followed began with an enemy already bleeding. Then came the ground assaults. The Empire believed in overwhelming force, in tides of soldiers clad in power armor, in orbital bombardments that left only ruin. But Earth's soldiers, the U.S. Marines, the Special Forces, the ragtag veterans who had spent their lives perfecting the art of asymmetrical combat, fought in a way the Empire had never encountered. They did not hold cities. They did not defend territories. They struck from the shadows, shattered supply lines, disappeared before retribution could follow. On the jungle world of Valtrex, 9, a battalion of Imperial troops marched into the ruins of a city they believed abandoned, only for its towers to collapse upon them, rigged with explosives planted days before. On the frozen plains of Epsilon Eridani Prime, a lone squadron of Marines lured an entire mechanized division into a narrow pass, where the sky itself rained fire, orbital artillery, called in with pinpoint precision. The Empire fought back with fury. They burned human colonies in retaliation, turned once thriving settlements into wastelands of ash and glass. They sent dreadnoughts the size of cities to bombard Earth's outposts into oblivion. And yet for every strike humanity answered with 10 more. The Empire, vast and old, was powerful beyond measure, but it was slow. It was accustomed to wars of patience, to drawn-out conflicts where enemies simply wore down over time. Humanity had no intention of waiting. And then, in a desperate bid to end the rebellion before it grew beyond control, the Empire gathered its forces for a decisive strike. A fleet larger than anything humanity had yet faced surged toward the outer colonies, an armada meant to break Earth's resolve. It was a show of force, a reminder of the Empire's supremacy. But for the first time in its long history, the Empire had chosen a battlefield where it was not the hunter. It was the hunted. Admiral Hayes stood once more on the bridge of the Nemesis, staring at the tactical display as the Imperial fleet approached. They outnumbered his forces 20-1. Their warships gleamed with centuries of technological advancement. Their commanders were veterans of 1,000 campaigns. And yet for the first time they hesitated, because they had begun to understand the truth. Humanity was not afraid. The order was given. The void erupted with fire. The battle should have been impossible. The Imperial fleet, an armada forged in 1,000 conquests, moved like a tidal wave, its warships stretching across the stars in an unbroken wall of firepower. But as their weapons ignited, as their dreadnoughts unleashed storms of plasma and their strike craft swarmed like locusts, they found themselves fighting shadows. The U.S. fleet did not meet them head-on. It vanished into the void, slipped between the cracks of Imperial formations, struck where they were weakest and vanished before retaliation could land. Admiral Hayes moved his forces like a surgeon wielding a scalpel against a beast bloated by centuries of complacency. The USS Nemesis led coordinated strikes that severed Imperial supply ships from their escorts, leaving them defenseless against precision raids. Stealth corvettes, invisible to Imperial sensors, drifted into enemy formations before unleashing payloads of kinetic harpoons that tore through hulls like paper. Artificial intelligence networks guided autonomous drones in erratic, unpredictable attack patterns that bypassed even the most advanced Imperial countermeasures. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. On the surface of Praxis 4, a key Imperial fortress world, a different war raged. The Marines had landed under cover of orbital bombardment, their drop pods streaking like meteors through the alien sky. The Empire, having suffered weeks of relentless sabotage and ambushes, had fortified the planet beyond reason. Towering citadels bristled with defense turrets, and mechanized legions patrolled the streets in endless formations. It was a city built to withstand sieges for decades. The Empire had assumed humanity would attack conventionally. They were wrong. At the heart of the enemy defenses, deep beneath the ground, the real battle had already been won. A team of Special Forces operatives, hand-picked, untraceable ghosts in the dark, had infiltrated the planetary command center days before the first Marine landed. Systems had been corrupted, automated defenses rerouted, vital infrastructure sabotaged in ways so subtle the Empire had not realized until the moment their shields fell. When the Marines surged forward, it was not into a killing field but into chaos. The once mighty Imperial garrison crumbled, their commanders screaming into dead calms, their reinforcements arriving only to find their strongholds already lost. And then the final stroke. As the Imperial fleet reeled from its losses, as their commanders desperately attempted to regain control of the collapsing warfront, Earth's true trump card was revealed. From deep within the Sol system, a weapon unlike any the galaxy had seen before emerged. A fusion of human ingenuity and the desperation of a species backed against the wall. The Odin Initiative, an experimental warship equipped with quantum displacement drives and a weapon system so devastating it bordered on myth, entered the battlefield. It moved in ways no Imperial vessel could predict, existing in one place and then another, evading attacks not by speed but by rewriting the very fabric of its location. Its weapons did not fire in straight lines but appeared mid-impact, bypassing shields and armor alike. Entire Imperial warships vanished in silent implosions, their atoms scattered across dimensions even the Empire's greatest minds could not comprehend. Panic spread. The Imperial Senate, watching from the safety of their distant palaces, could no longer deny the truth. Their empire, eternal and invincible, was breaking. And then, in one final audacious strike, humanity delivered its last message. The U.S. forces stormed the Empire's capital world, not in conquest but in retribution. The halls where the SAS general had been sentenced now echoed with the sounds of battle. His execution platform shattered beneath the boots of the very soldiers he had inspired. The Galactic Emperor, once a god in the eyes of his people, was dragged from his throne, his robes torn, his face bloodied. He was not executed. He was not given martyrdom. He was made to watch as his empire collapsed, as the banners of Earth were raised in the heart of his dominion, as the history of his people was rewritten by the very species he had sought to break. And then when the dust settled, when the last gun fell silent, the victors did not celebrate. They did not revel in their conquest. They remembered. The war had not been fought for glory. It had not been fought for expansion or power. It had been fought for vengeance, for justice, for a man who had stood before the might of an empire and, with his final breath, declared its doom. Earth had won. But humanity had changed. The galaxy would never forget. The war was over, but the echoes of its fury remained. The once mighty galactic empire lay in ruins, its fleets shattered, its worlds burned, its rulers either dead or in chains. The banners of Earth hung over the imperial capital, not as symbols of conquest, but as a stark reminder of what had been wrought. Humanity had not fought for dominion nor for plunder. They had fought because they had been given no other choice. And in doing so they had changed the balance of the galaxy forever. Admiral Hayes stood atop the ruins of what had once been the Imperial Senate, the air thick with the acrid scent of fire and the distant hum of reconstruction. The planet, once a beacon of authority, had become a monument to its own arrogance. The Emperor had been taken away under heavy guard, his eyes hollow, his shoulders sagging under the weight of defeat. There was no dignity left in him. No fire. No defiance. Only the resigned acceptance of a man who had lived long enough to witness his own irrelevance. But war was never truly won in battle alone. Hayes knew this. Victory on the battlefield was a temporary thing, a momentary silence before the next storm. The war had not just destroyed the empire, it had unmade an order that had existed for centuries. Power abhorred a vacuum, and already the remnants of the empire's hierarchy were shifting, reforming, grasping at whatever influence they could salvage. Across the conquered territories, old vassals now saw an opportunity to carve out their own dominions. Former imperial officers, stripped of their authority, sought revenge or refuge, waiting for a chance to strike back. And beyond all of it, the rest of the galaxy watched, waiting to see what humanity would do next. The President of the United States, weary but resolute, had arrived in the imperial capital under the protection of the newly formed Allied Expeditionary Command. Negotiations had begun, not for conquest, not for annexation, but for the establishment of something new. A fragile, uncertain peace, built upon the wreckage of a broken empire. Humanity had not come to rule, but neither had they come to leave a shattered husk in their wake. They had come to ensure that no empire would ever again believe itself untouchable. Yet for all the declarations of peace, for all the ceremonies and documents signed in blood and ink, Hayes knew the truth. The war had ended, but the battle for the future had only begun. Revenge, no matter how righteous, could not be the foundation of what came next. Humanity had won its war, but whether it would win the peace was another matter entirely. And somewhere in the cold depths of the void, among the wreckage of forgotten battles and the silent ghosts of fallen warriors, something watched. Something waited. Because history had never been written in moments of stillness, but in the fires that came after. The first signs of trouble came not from the ruins of the empire but from within humanity's own ranks. In the wake of victory, the question that had been whispered in the shadows now stood at the forefront of every discussion. What happens now? The war had united Earth under a singular purpose, but without an enemy to fight, old tensions threatened to resurface. The United States had led the charge, but it had not fought alone. Now its allies, the European Federation, the Pacific Consortium, the Martian Commonwealth, each sought their place in the new order. Admiral Hayes found himself in a war of a different kind. Where once he had commanded fleets, now he sat in negotiation chambers, facing political leaders who spoke in carefully measured tones but whose eyes burned with unspoken demands. The empire had left behind a wealth of technology, resources, and territory. Some believed humanity should claim it all, cementing itself as the dominant power of the galaxy. Others argued that doing so would make them no different from the empire they had just destroyed. And beneath it all, there was the silent, growing fear. What if the war had only woken something worse? Reports trickled in from the outer fringes of known space. Imperial garrisons that should have been abandoned had gone silent, not because they were empty, but because something had taken their place. In the void beyond the Empire's borders, long-range scouts detected disturbances, ships that did not match any known design, signals that pulsed in irregular, almost organic patterns. They were not remnants of the Empire. They were something else. Hayes knew better than to dismiss the warnings. The Empire had ruled for thousands of years, expanding, conquering, absorbing entire civilizations. And yet, for all their arrogance, they had never expanded beyond a certain point. There had always been a border they refused to cross, a region of space they had left untouched. Humanity had assumed it was simply the limit of their ambition. Now it seemed more likely that it had been a line they had been too afraid to cross. A distress signal from a newly occupied colony confirmed his worst fears. The transmission lasted only a few seconds before dissolving into static, but it was long enough to capture a final, chilling message. Not imperial. Not human. They're already here. The war that had reshaped the galaxy had not ended it. It had only set the stage for something far greater. And this time humanity was not facing an empire built on arrogance and bureaucracy. This time they had awakened something that did not negotiate, did not conquer. It consumed. The darkness beyond the former empire's borders had always been a mystery. Even at the height of its power, the empire had never expanded into that vast, uncharted void. Star charts marked it with vague warnings. Unstable space, anomalous activity, or simply unexplored. But now those empty places had begun to stir. Humanity had shattered an empire that had ruled for millennia. But in doing so, they had removed the one force that had kept whatever lay beyond at bay. Admiral Hayes stood in the command center of the USS Nemesis, watching the grainy footage recovered from the last moments of the lost colony. The images were chaotic. Flashes of light, streaks of motion, shadowy figures moving in ways that defied physics. The sensors hadn't been able to register their approach. One moment the colony was operational. The next its systems failed, its people vanished. No wreckage, no survivors. Just silence. Across the newly formed human territories, tensions spread like wildfire. Earth's leadership debated whether to pull back, to consolidate what had been won, but Hayes knew that wasn't an option. Whatever had arrived was not going to stop. Retreating would only delay the inevitable. The fleet was mobilized, reconnaissance teams sent to investigate the outermost colonies, but none returned. Whatever was out there, it was watching, waiting, learning. Then the first true contact. A lone Imperial warship thought to have been destroyed in the war, drifted into human space, barely functional, its hull scarred by something far worse than battle. Its distress signal was weak, barely decipherable, but the message was clear. We tried to run. There is no running. Boarding teams found no crew, no bodies, only a ship that had been hollowed out. The systems had been rewritten, the very metal of its frame altered at a molecular level, as if it were being remade into something else. The logs were corrupted, but one fragment of audio remained. An Imperial officer, breathless, terrified. They are not machines. They are not flesh. They are the end. The Galactic War had ended, but the real battle had just begun. And this time there would be no second chances. The weight of silence pressed down on the bridge of the USS Nemesis as Admiral Hayes stood before the central display. The recovered Imperial warship, still adrift at the edge of human-controlled space, hung on the screen like a ghost. Whatever had taken its crew had left no trace. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Just an empty shell, its systems rewritten by something beyond comprehension. The engineers had quarantined the ship, but even in death, it exuded an unsettling presence, as though something unseen still lingered in its corridors. Hayes turned to Lieutenant Commander Vasquez, his intelligence officer who had been studying the ship's logs. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, betrayed the unease that even she could not mask. "We've managed to recover more from the black box," she said, her voice carefully measured. The last intact transmission wasn't Imperial. It was a warning. She pressed a button and the audio crackled to life. The voice was unlike anything they had encountered before. Distorted, layered, a chorus of something inhuman speaking through broken Imperial systems. "They do not see. They do not hear. They consume." The transmission ended abruptly. No coordinates. No demands. No declaration of war. Just an ominous statement devoid of emotion. Captain Reynolds, standing beside Hayes, exhaled sharply. "This isn't a rebellion. This isn't some warlord rising from the ashes of the Empire." He looked at the Admiral. "This is something else." Hayes nodded. He had seen wars unfold, had studied the patterns of conflict. But this was different. The Empire had ruled through power, through control. Even in their arrogance they had been predictable. But what humanity faced now wasn't about power or control. It was something deeper, more primal. A force that neither negotiated nor conquered. A force that simply erased. "Sir," Vasquez continued, hesitating. "There's something else." She pulled up an overlay, a star map of Imperial expansion over the last 1,000 years. Then another layer. The regions where the Empire had never expanded. The empty void beyond the known galaxy. A perfect boundary. Uncrossed. Untouched. "The Empire didn't stop expanding because they lacked the strength," she said quietly. "They stopped because they knew something we didn't." A cold realization settled over the room. Humanity had not just shattered an empire. They had torn down the one barrier that had kept this at bay. Hayes straightened. His voice was calm but resolute. "Order the fleet to high alert. I want recon drones deployed to the Imperial frontier. We need to know what we're facing." A tense silence followed. Then Reynolds spoke, his voice grim. "And if we're already too late?" Hayes looked at the screen, at the derelict ship that had drifted from the void. The answer was already there, etched into the hollowed remains of what had once been the galaxy's greatest empire. "Then we do what we've always done," he said. "We fight." The first attack came without warning. A colony on the farthest edges of human-controlled space, New Horizon, went dark. No distress call. No evacuation. One day, it was a thriving settlement of 60,000 souls. The next it was gone. The satellites continued to broadcast, the orbital stations remained intact, but every trace of human life had simply vanished. Admiral Hayes watched the grainy surveillance footage in silence. The last recorded moments showed nothing but flickering streetlights and empty streets. No panic. No bodies. Just an eerie, unnatural stillness. Then at precisely 3:17 Standard Time the cameras failed. Every system shut down in unison. By the time long-range scouts arrived, there was nothing left but an empty city, its buildings untouched, its people erased as if they had never existed. "We sent a recon team down," Vasquez said, her voice tight. "Drones first. No contact. Then an insertion team." She hesitated, glancing at Reynolds before continuing. "Only one made it back." She pressed a button and a recording played. The lone survivor, a hardened Marine by the name of Sergeant Keller, sat in a decontamination chamber, his face pale, his hands trembling despite the cocktail of stabilizers in his bloodstream. His voice was barely above a whisper. They were there. I swear to God they were there. Who? An off-screen officer asked. Keller swallowed hard. The colonists. They were standing in the streets. In their homes. Just staring. They didn't move. Didn't blink. It was like they were still alive, but they weren't. His breathing hitched. And then they saw us. The recording glitched. When it resumed, Keller was curled in on himself, rocking slightly. His voice was hoarse. They all turned at the same time. Like they heard something we didn't. And then they smiled. Silence hung in the air. The recording ended. Hayes exhaled slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Where is Keller now? Vasquez hesitated. He didn't make it, sir. A long pause. No one needed to ask how. The room felt smaller, heavier, as if an invisible weight pressed down on all of them. They had fought the Empire with fire and steel, with strategy and superior tactics. But this was something different. Something that didn't play by the rules of war. Hayes turned to the tactical display. We lock down the sector. No ships in or out. If this spreads, we lose everything. Reynolds nodded grimly. And if it's already spread? Hayes looked at the empty city on the screen, the ghost of New Horizon hanging in the void. Then we weren't fast enough. The quarantine order came too late. The silence that had consumed New Horizon was already spreading, slipping through the cracks of human space like an unseen tide. The colony of Blackstone followed next, then Meridian, then Vesper Station. Each one fell in the same way. No distress calls, no resistance, only the eerie, empty husks of settlements left behind. Cities untouched, ships still docked, personal belongings scattered as if abandoned mid-motion. No bodies. No signs of violence. Just the overwhelming absence of life. Admiral Hayes stood at the heart of the USS Nemesis, staring at the growing list of lost outposts. His officers worked feverishly around him, voices low but urgent, the hum of tactical displays filling the air. Every strategy, every protocol for planetary warfare, meant nothing against an enemy that didn't fight in ways they understood. Lieutenant Commander Vasquez approached, her expression grim. Sir, we've got another incident. This one's different. She hesitated. It's not a colony. Hayes turned sharply. Where? Vasquez took a breath. The Ulysses, a military convoy out of Titan shipyards. 17 vessels, including 2 carriers. They went dark 4 hours ago. The Ulysses had been part of the resupply effort for the fleet's frontier defenses. A fully armed escort, thousands of trained personnel. If even they had disappeared without a trace. Hayes' jaw tightened. Any distress signal? Sensor logs? Vasquez shook her head. Nothing. One moment they were there, the next they weren't. But, she hesitated, then pulled up a grainy visual feed. Just before they vanished, long-range satellites picked this up. The display flickered, showing static-washed footage from a deep space observation post. For a moment there was only the darkness of space. Then something shifted. The stars themselves seemed to ripple, distort, as though space had bent and twisted around some unseen presence. A void where nothing should exist. No ship, no structure. Just the outline of something wrong. Then the feed cut to black. The command center was deathly silent. Captain Reynolds exhaled slowly. That's not cloaking, he said, his voice low. That's something else. Hayes' mind worked through the implications. The Empire had never crossed beyond a certain point in the galaxy. Now they knew why. Whatever was out there didn't conquer. It didn't destroy. It simply erased. The Admiral straightened. Give me the fleet. All of it. We're not waiting for this to come to us. Vasquez hesitated. Sir, we don't even know what this is. Hayes looked at the empty screen where the Ulysses had once been. His voice was quiet but firm. We're about to find out. The fleet assembled at the edge of known space, a wall of steel and firepower arrayed against the unknown. Carriers, destroyers, dreadnoughts. Every warship humanity could muster stood in formation, their weapons primed, their crews silent with the weight of what lay ahead. The USS Nemesis sat at the vanguard, its massive frame dwarfing the ships around it. From the bridge, Admiral Hayes watched the void, knowing that whatever lurked beyond had already seen them. Long-range scanners pulsed into the darkness, but they returned nothing. No heat signatures, No electromagnetic disturbances. It was as if space itself had swallowed everything beyond the frontier. Even the stars seemed dimmer, their light struggling against an unseen presence. Still no movement, Vasquez reported, her fingers moving quickly over the sensor displays. Whatever took the Ulysses, it's not showing itself. Reynolds folded his arms. Then we make it. Hayes gave a short nod. Deploy the probes. Full spectrum scans. If there's something out there, we're going to find it. The order went out and a dozen sleek automated drones launched from the fleet, vanishing into the abyss. They moved fast, relaying real-time data back to the bridge. Radiation levels, gravitational anomalies, dark matter readings. For several long minutes there was nothing. Just static, empty space. Then all at once, every probe sent the same signal. Something was coming. The fleet's communications flooded with automated warnings as the drones detected an immense gravitational disturbance. Not a ship, not a fleet, but a void. A massive absence moving toward them at impossible speed. The first visual feed came through and a cold dread settled in Hayes' chest. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't anything they could understand. A darkness, deeper than the void itself, moving like liquid shadow. It didn't emit energy. It didn't reflect light. It simply was. And as the fleet stared into it, it stared back. Then the lights flickered. Systems across the fleet glitched, screens flashing with unreadable data. The ship's engines dimmed. The artificial gravity trembled. And in that moment Hayes realized what was happening. It wasn't attacking their fleet. It was undoing it. All ships open fire. Hayes commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos. The fleet responded instantly. Railguns roared, missiles streaked into the black, energy cannons unleashed torrents of destructive force. But the darkness absorbed it all. The weapons vanished into its depths without impact, swallowed like droplets into an ocean. Then the first ship vanished. No explosion, no wreckage, just gone. One moment a cruiser stood beside them, its guns flaring. The next there was nothing but open space. Then another. And another. Panic rippled through the comm channels. Officers shouted orders, pilots scrambled to reposition, but there was nowhere to run. The void was closing in, indifferent, unstoppable. Hayes gripped the edge of his command console. Fall back. Now. The fleet turned, engines burning at full power, but even as they retreated, the darkness followed. Silent. Unrelenting. Vasquez's voice was barely a whisper. We woke it up. Hayes watched as the void swallowed another ship whole. The realization settled like ice in his veins. It had always been awake. They had simply been foolish enough to draw its gaze. The retreat was chaos. Ships scattered, engines burning at maximum output as the void pursued, stretching across the stars like an endless tide. It didn't move like a fleet or a living thing. It consumed, devouring the space where reality should have been. Hayes had never seen anything like it. No weapons worked. No strategy mattered. Everything humanity had built, every warship, every defense, meant nothing in the face of something that did not belong to the laws of the universe. The USS Nemesis led the retreat, its thrusters shaking from the strain of pushing the massive dreadnought to its limits. Behind it, ships flickered out of existence one by one. No explosions, no wreckage, just a cold, silent erasure. Hayes gritted his teeth as another cruiser, the Aegis, disappeared from his tactical display. Report, he barked. All ships still running are vectoring for the jump point, Vasquez said, voice tight with barely suppressed panic. But we don't know if it can follow. Hayes turned toward Reynolds, whose face was pale, sweat glistening along his brow. Can we make the jump? We're charging the drive, but Reynolds hesitated. Sir, there's an anomaly. The word felt almost laughable now. Anomaly. As if they weren't staring into something that defied everything they understood. What kind of anomaly? Hayes demanded. Reynolds gestured to the tactical screen. Whatever this thing is, it's distorting subspace. Our calculations are off. Jumping now could send us anywhere or nowhere. Hayes clenched his fists. They had no choice. Staying meant death or worse. We jump anyway. The engines screamed as the countdown began. Other ships in the fleet followed suit, preparing to hurl themselves into the unknown rather than let the darkness claim them. Seconds ticked by. The void drew closer, a crushing inevitability. The bridge lights flickered again, shadows seeming to stretch, twisting unnaturally. Then, at the very edge of sensor range, something changed. For the first time the void hesitated. It didn't stop. It didn't retreat. But it slowed. A sound or something like it resonated through the ship. Not through the speakers or the hull, but through space itself. A deep, unfathomable hum that settled into their bones, vibrating through every atom. It wasn't communication. It was something far worse. Recognition. Hayes met Vasquez's gaze, and in that moment he knew. It wasn't chasing them. It was studying them. The jump drive completed its cycle. There was no time for debate. No time for hesitation. Jump, Hayes ordered. The USS Nemesis and the last remnants of the fleet vanished into the unknown. And behind them in the void something watched. Waiting. The USS Nemesis tore through subspace, the jump drive burning hot as it flung the ship across the void. For a fleeting moment, the crew felt the familiar pull of transition, the distortion of reality that accompanied every FTL leap. Then the sensation twisted. Subspace groaned around them, bending in ways it never should. The ship's hull shuddered. Alarms wailed. Hayes gripped the console as gravity wavered, his vision swimming. Report. Something's wrong, Reynolds said, fingers flying across his console. The calculations, he stopped, eyes widening. We're off course, Vasquez swore. How bad? Reynolds didn't answer right away. He just stared at the data. I don't know where we are. The jump ended abruptly, reality snapping back into place like a rubber band stretched too far. The Nemesis lurched into normal space, the force slamming Hayes into his chair. Sparks rained from a nearby console. The overhead lights flickered, dimming to emergency power. For several long moments no one spoke. Then Vasquez whispered, "Where the hell are we?" The main screen flickered to life, revealing the vast, uncharted blackness ahead. No stars. No planets. Just an endless absence stretching in every direction. The space around them felt wrong. Not empty but incomplete, as if something fundamental was missing. The void they had fled was gone, yet its presence lingered, unseen but felt. Reynolds ran a trembling hand through his hair. This isn't on any star charts. No known sector looks like this. He turned, voice hollow. We could be anywhere, or nowhere. A cold knot formed in Hayes' stomach. Check for the rest of the fleet. Vasquez's fingers flew across the controls, scanning the abyss. The silence dragged on until finally she shook her head. No signals. No ships. He swallowed. We're alone. A heavy silence settled over the bridge. Alone. That word carried weight in the depths of space, but this felt different. It wasn't just distance. It was isolation. Then the sensors twitched. A faint, intermittent signal just at the edge of detection. Vasquez straightened. Wait. I'm picking up something. Hayes leaned forward. A ship? Maybe. She fine-tuned the instruments, her brow furrowing. It's weak, but it's human. The tension shifted. A ship meant survivors. A chance. Can you locate it? Hayes asked. Vasquez nodded slowly. Yes. Bearing 215 Mark 7. Not far. Hayes made his decision. Set course. Full scan. Let's find out who or what made it through. The Nemesis turned toward the unknown, its engines pushing forward into the dark. And somewhere beyond the void something watched. Something waited. The boarding pod detached from the USS Nemesis, its thrusters firing in short, controlled bursts as it drifted toward the wreckage of the Ulysses. Inside, the away team sat in tense silence, their weapons held tight, their armor reflecting the dim emergency lights. Commander Elias Ward led the team, his face locked in a grim expression as he checked his rifle for the third time. The closer they got, the clearer the damage became. The Ulysses had been ripped apart not by weapons but by something far worse. Sections of the hull were folded inward as if space itself had crushed them. Black scorch marks ran along the metal, their patterns unnatural, shifting in ways that made the eye ache to look at them. Readings are unstable, Lieutenant Harper muttered, her gloved hands gripping her scanner. Electromagnetic interference. I can't get a clear read on the atmosphere inside. Ward adjusted his helmet seal. Then assumed the worst. The pod latched onto what remained of an airlock, its clamps hissing as they locked into place. With a heavy clang, the hatch opened. Cold, stale air rushed past them, carrying the scent of something metallic, something wrong. Weapons raised, the team moved in. Their boots echoed against the ruined metal as they stepped into the Ulysses corridors. The emergency lights flickered weakly, casting jagged shadows across the walls. The air was thick, heavy with an unseen pressure that pressed against their skulls. "Jesus," Harper whispered. Bodies lined the corridors. Some of the crew had died running, their fingers still outstretched toward sealed doors. Others had clawed at their helmets, their visors cracked from the inside. The worst were those who had simply stopped, their expressions frozen in eerie, vacant calm. Ward's jaw tightened. "Stay sharp. Find the survivors." They moved deeper into the ship, passing shattered consoles and flickering monitors that displayed unreadable symbols, characters that twisted the longer they stared. Then the whispering started. At first it was subtle, like static over the comms, an occasional crackle that could have been interference. But then it grew. Voices. Faint, overlapping, speaking in tongues no one understood. "Comms malfunction?" Harper asked, adjusting her earpiece. "Negative," said Corporal Danner. That's not interference." The lights dimmed. The shadows stretched. Then a voice, clear, came through their helmets. "You shouldn't have come." Harper gasped. "That wasn't one of ours." Ward's grip on his rifle tightened. He turned a corner and found a survivor. A single figure sat slumped against the wall, clad in the torn uniform of the Ulysses. Their helmet was gone, revealing a gaunt face, eyes wide, unblinking. Their lips moved soundlessly, forming words that never came. Ward knelt beside them. "Lieutenant? Can you hear me?" The officer's gaze snapped to his, suddenly aware, impossibly fast. A slow smile crept across their face. "It's still here." The lights went out. And the whispering became a scream.